everybody. Welcome to tonight's panel discussion. I am your moderator for the evening, Presi Yamu. Tonight's topic of discussion will be education beyond borders. We'll be discussing what education is like from different perspectives from our wonderful panelists from different countries. But first, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Jason Scorzer. He's the Vice Provost of Academic and International Affairs and a professor of philosophy. So a round of applause for our keynote speaker, please.
Thank you very much, Prez. I've never been a keynote speaker before. I usually have your job of introducing the speaker, but I will try to carry on as best I can. What I've decided to do is kind of set some context for the conversation between our panelists, to talk a little bit about where education is at the very highest level globally before we get into some detailed analysis of particular issues, particular countries. So I'd like to start with a quote, one of my favorite quotes by H.G. Wells. "Civilization is a race between education and catastrophe." Well, what does that mean? That means if education isn't part of the solution, if education isn't valued, if education doesn't receive appropriate investment, what we're going to get is devastation of communities, devastation of nations, misunderstandings, and ultimately conflict. So what, as a global community, are we doing to avoid the catastrophe? 15 years ago, well, now almost 17 years ago, the United Nations initiated a very ambitious program called the Millennium Development Agenda. And they identified 8 goals, 8 universal ideas or objectives for not just the UN, but for all the member states, all of civil society, all of higher education as well, to engage in and support. And you could see on the screen that number 2 pertains to education, but it pertains to primary education. Achieve universal primary education by 2015. From one perspective, that's not a very ambitious goal. Universal primary education, that's through like grade 5 or grade 6 in the American system. That's not a lot of education, and yet it was ambitious because tens of millions of children around the world in the year 2000 had no access to primary education at all, or had inconsistent or interrupted access to primary education. Interrupted because of civil war, because of conflict, because of disease, all sorts of reasons why interrupted. So all the countries of the world, more or less, tried to make this happen. And they did okay. They made progress, but they didn't get there. Some of the progress you'll see, enrollment rates, particularly in developing companies, went up over the 15 years of the Millennium Development Objective. You'll see also that the number of primary school age children, so children between the ages of 5 and 12, went up. Many, many more children were in school than at the beginning of the initiative. The greatest advances were in sub-Saharan Africa, but you can see with the data that I'll show momentarily, there's still a lot of children that never even get a 5th grade education. And there was a lot of advances made with regard to education for girls. In many countries in the world, girls are much less likely to go to school at all or to complete school if they have an opportunity to go to school. So a few graphs. You can see in the year 2000, 100 million elementary school age children who should have been in school weren't. In 2015, that number was down to 57 million. But 57 million children is way too many children to be denied basic education. You'll see in sub-Saharan Africa in the year 2000, the primary school enrollment rate was 60%. 60%. That means 4 out of every 10 children were denied basic primary school education. In 2015, that was up to 80%, so progress, good progress, but not anywhere near where we need to be. And I like this stat in Southern Asia, which would include India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, possibly the Maldives. In 1990, only 74 girls were in school for every 100 boys. And at the end of the Millennium Development Initiative in that region, there were 103 girls in school for every 100 boys. So now they need to do something about the boys. What seems to be working? One important initiative that has worked in many countries is the abolition of school fees. That enables the poorest families to send their children to school. Promoting girl-friendly schools, schools where families feel safe and comfortable sending their female children to. Expanding access in remote and rural areas. If you have to travel 10 miles on foot to go to school, you're less likely to go to school. Providing school meals has been important, not just in developing countries, but also in developed countries, because you learn better if you have a full stomach, and you're more likely to be sent to school by your parents, particularly if you are from a poor community, if there's going to be a meal. So we're not done. We've made progress, but we're not done. In 2015, the United Nations launched the sequel to the Millennium Development Agenda, the Sustainable Development Agenda. And instead of 8 goals, there are 17 goals. And the commitment in the area of education is to finish the job that was begun by the Millennial Development, provide primary school to all students, to make primary school universal in every country around the world, but also to expand the mission to include secondary school education, to include continuing adult education, to include job training. So deepening and broadening the impact of education in our community. So how do we move forward from where we are? One very important thing is that we think and talk about education as a basic human right. Basic in the sense that it is universal, that every human being has a right to mental self-development, but also fundamental in the sense that other rights depend upon it. If you can't learn, you can't be economically successful. If you can't learn, you're less likely to be healthy. If you can't learn, you are much, much more likely to die at an earlier age. We need to give more emphasis to individual learners at every level of education. It's not enough to put a curriculum together and assume that everyone's going to learn the same way at the same speed. So higher commitment to giving individualized learning opportunities to students is tremendously important. More work needs to be done to close the gender gap, particularly as you get into secondary school and universities. Income gaps are one of the main reasons that people don't continue their education to more advanced levels, and yet it is failure to advance your education that locks families and communities into cycles of poverty. We need to focus on transitions now. In a lot of countries, the language of instruction changes between primary school and secondary school. So in the elementary school grade, students might be learning in a local language, and then suddenly at secondary school level, they're learning in English or they're learning in French. And that holds a lot of young people back because of that transition. We need to emphasize the importance of education for entire communities. There are some people in some places that think of education as a private good, right? Something that benefits me or you or that guy in the back. But we need to think and talk about education as a public good, something that advances an entire society, an entire culture, an entire economy, not something that a single person possesses at the expense of other people. We need to involve local communities in education. In a lot of parts of the world, education is dictated by a national government. That might have some advantages. It also has lots of disadvantages. What you lose there are the stakeholders in the community, civic leaders, parents, clergy. So it's important that there be local dimension to the management of education. And lastly, and here I'd like to transition to the balance of our program, we need to listen seriously to students. And that's hard for teachers and professors and administrators to do, because even though we were smart and knew everything when we were your age, obviously we can't rely on you for the same level of perceptiveness. Of course, I'm speaking ironically. We have to listen to students very carefully and help them find the solutions for universal education, higher quality education as we move forward. A few years back, a group of Fairleigh Dickinson University students, almost all of them from African countries, put together a project which they called the African Higher Education Consultation Project. And they put out a survey to fellow students at universities across Africa. And they asked really one basic question: what would you do to improve education in your country without spending any additional money? Which is often the challenge. How would you reorganize things? How would you reform things? So I'd like to leave our panelists with that question. They may not get to it. They're important people. They have things to do. And I'd like to leave the audience with that question, because that is our challenge. How do we improve education without committing a vast amount of new resources, which may, in many parts of the world, not be available? So thank you for giving me the time, Press, and carry on.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to take the time to introduce our panelists, and we can go down the line in ascending order, starting with you, Jude.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jude. I'm a political science major, pre-medical student. I'm a junior, and I'm from Nigeria.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Bishaka. I'm from Nepal. The capital city of Nepal is Kathmandu. That's where I'm from. I'm an international relations major and global and cultural studies minor. And I'm a global scholar and an honor student here at FDU. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Johannes Frommerei. I come from Germany. I'm a junior and I have a dual degree. So I study socially, politics, economics back in Germany and international relationships in America here.
Hi folks, my name is Aditi. I'm from India. I study public administration and I'm a graduate student.
A round of applause for our panelists for being brave enough to come up here today. Thank you.
We had no feeling of after class, you could just walk up to your professor and say, the last problem you said in class, I really did not get that. Could you please repeat that? Or could you please help me with this problem? There was no such thing, because every professor, they're so busy. They have all the classes to take care of. So education in Nigeria is a fight for all. So it's like it's a struggle whereby we all persevere to be the best just to get a better job. So we aspire to be educated in Nigeria so as to get a better job, to take care of our family members, and not just because we love what we do or we love what we study. And education in Nigeria is so messed up right now in such a way whereby students are encouraged to pursue careers and fields that are much more profitable compared to other professions that are not. So Nigerian students are encouraged to go for medicine, engineering, nursing, all those professions. But they're restricted and they're discouraged by their parents, friends, and loved ones to go for careers like political science, like history or literature, all this stuff. And that's the stage at which we find Nigerian educational system right now, as I speak.
Very interesting, Jude. A lot of Nigerians that I've met, they have double majors, and I know that a lot of them take political science very personally, and they use it as one of their majors, not just minors, but majors. And that's very interesting, because I've never had other people from other nations where that was a common theme. But I think perhaps maybe political science is very taken in a very passionate manner. And I can relate to that because back home, everything has a political base back in Nepal, where schools and universities are politically backed up, or you have political agendas wrapped up to it. That would be the general theme within it as well. Nepal is a little tiny country that looks like a brick. It's situated right in between China and India. We're very different from a lot of other Southeastern and Asian countries, because even though we're Asian, but we're still developing, and we're not there yet, because we have never been colonized by any other larger nations or powers before. The British tried for some time because of a geographical location and the setting. It didn't work out. So because of that, development has not been done much. The further you are, and the further you are located from the capital city, the difficult developments there are. But because I was fortunate enough, I was raised in an international schooling system ever since I was a kindergartner. I've had international friends. I have less Nepali friends than I have my international friends back home. They're all over the world. Because it was an international schooling system, we had European educational system of IGSE, O-levels, A-levels. And in terms of American system, we had IB levels. We did a bunch of PSATs, SATs. A lot of those things were involved because of that schooling system. And to have that experience is so much more different than being a normal Nepali student who's away from the capital city and has that kind of educational background where they don't have any kind of system where they can mobilize themselves and get better forward, because it's very government based. Because even if when you have public schools and private schools, they have a different system, but if you're politically inclined or if you have political basis within the system of the university or the college, a lot of things are dictated according to that.
Wow. So what we heard so far is two different countries from two totally different regions, but to some extent they had much in common also, because education, it's a very high value good. It's not for everyone, and so as I sit here as the only other Western country, so I represent also another Western country education system from Germany. And the huge difference in Germany is education, it's a public good already. So it's free for everyone. Everyone can go to school. You don't have to pay for school. You don't have to pay for university. University fees as public university is only about 500 per semester, and it's the transactions fees only what you pay. So who's paying for this? Mainly it's a taxpayer. We have a tax rate between 35 and 50% depending on your average what you get, like what is your amount of money, what you earn. And I want to go quickly over the school system because it might be a bit different in comparison to others. So we have primary school 4 years. Just 4 years sounds not very much. Do you hear me? Is it okay? Good. Doesn't really sound very much, but you have many different subjects also in the 4 years, and afterwards we have a 3 separated school system. So afterwards you have to choose to which kind of school you want to go to. And sometimes it's very difficult, especially for parents, and you're very young and you don't know what to do. And it's really depending on what your parents are doing. So the recommendation, you get recommendations from the students and from the teachers, but in the end the parents decide for the children where they want to send the children to. And so if you go to the normal public school, which is called general school, then you have until 16, school until 16. If you go to the middle school, you have school until 17. And if you do the A level, which is called Abitur in German, then you have in total 12 or 13 years school. We have many federal states, as you have in America too. So the difference is as well, every federal state has its own laws, depending on the A level, depending on how the school system is structured. So it's really depending on where you have in which area you have your degree, your average, and so some areas have 12 years, some areas have 13 years school. Sometimes you can decide if you want to have 12 years or 13 years school. It's a big issue as well, depending on that. So after 8 years at school, so I was the last one in Baden-Württemberg, where it's in the south, it's next to Bavaria, who had 13 years school. So we had 2 years at the same time they did get their A level. And your average of your Abitur does count if you're allowed to go to specific majors, for example, for political science as well. Then sometimes as well, if you want to study economics, especially if you want to study medicine, you have to have a specific average A grade, and only then you can go. And so like what you had in school, these 13 years as well, especially the last 2 years, are very important for you for your future career as well. So a lot of students, they can't really do, or just only in a very difficult way. So there are other ways, but it's very difficult to study medicine, for example, afterwards. Well, we have to focus on the difference as well of private and public schools. So generally speaking, we have a lot of public schools, so everybody normally goes to public school. There are private schools, but not as many as in America, or we heard like 2 panelists before. So as it is free, and most schools are paid by taxes in Germany, the education quality is good, I would say. And also for university, there are only a few universities who are private. I studied before, for example, 2 years law in Heidelberg, but I decided to quit it. So you can do it, because if you don't have to pay, and if you want to decide to study something else. So I decided for myself to study at a private university later, because I didn't want to sit with 200, 300, 400 people in the same room. And I thought it would be a better system, and it's also about what you can do above it. So our university where we go to, they offer a lot of programs for university students, and so I decided to go for this as well. And so these are the main differences.
Okay, everybody is familiar with India,
and I would like to mention that I am proud of my education system because the things which I've studied, I think it is helping me now, and I am very sure that it is going to help me later. For example, there was no distinction between public and private school. The ratio was same. We were like allowed to study whatever we want to study. No doubt it was paid by itself, but although it's developing country, everybody was able to afford the education. The schools started from the two classes where it's called junior level and the senior level. The children get admitted at the age of 5, and then you can continue till you're 18. And then you got to choose your major in your 9th standard, where you choose science, commerce, or arts, and then you go to the respective fields. The only thing which I didn't like about it was there was a distinction of the caste system. Like if you belong to a lower caste, you get more seats for your further studies. And if you belong to a higher caste, so they have less number of seats for you. So that was the only problem with our system. Secondly, we had, although it's developing and we know everything is so politically connected, the corruption made it a bit difficult because if you, for example, when I was studying my bachelor's, if I would have failed in a subject, I would have gone back and paid the fees for giving the re-exam. But then if I would have been a daughter of a big rich man, so I would have paid them more money and then I would have been promoted to the next class. So that's the problem with the education there, but we are working on it, and it's not recently, they have passed many laws, and then it's going to be sorted out as soon as possible, and I am proud of my education system. Thank you.
So our first question goes out to Johannes. So previously you mentioned education is good in Germany. Can you clarify on that, please? And what do you believe defines a good education?
At school, at universities, are pretty equalized. So there are not huge differences also in the quality of universities. Generally speaking, it's not really depending so much as well later for your job to which kind of university you went, but more like what kind of different degree you get. So like a Bachelor of Science, it's more valued at a Bachelor of Arts, for example. Then I think really one of the best thing is that it is really for free, so potentially everybody can study the same, and it is really only depending on your degree and on your average in the Abitur at first. But in the end, what you have to mention as well is that education is also depending on the family background to some extent, because, for example, if your parents didn't go to university and they don't have a good education and they're not good in German, for example, they can't help you with your homework, so the average of your degree will decline. And if the average of the A level is very, like, one of the most important things in Germany, then to some extent those families, they can't help each other, and say some people suffer on it actually.
Okay, thank you. Say again? Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next question is from our representative from Nepal, Bashaka. So you mentioned that the British were unable to have colonized Nepal. Do you believe it would be more developed had that your country would have been more developed in today's modern world in regards to other developed countries had the British imperialized Nepal?
Very smart question, because whenever there is conquerorship, there's bound to be development because they want to better whatever land they've conquered, and that makes sense. It's a political theme that has been going on for a lot of years. In Nepal, when people talk about other countries and when we hear about it in the news about development of other nations, we think perhaps our stagnant is because perhaps not happening because that development was not doubled. But certainly, as the situation is, it's about how we make use of it. it is very insensitive of me to say had it not been colonized, because we've never been to that situation, and for us to be saying that without proper context is very insensitive, because for the other nations that got to where they are, they had to go through a lot of hardships. So for us to get there, that would have been a good incentive, but it would have progressed in its own pace. Because it's a small country, it's understandable, and it's in Asia within two large powers, and it's bound to have that pause in its development phase, no wonder. But it would have progressed somehow, but it would be in its own little pace. As long as we have political stability, that would be the main cause, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, and our next question is for you, Aditi. So you mentioned that you previously that you're proud of your education in India, which I applaud you for. That's a great thing to hear from a student in the academic system. Oftentimes students, they tend to complain about the education that they receive. But you also did mention that there was a caste system. So how has that personally affected your education?
Okay, so I wanted to be a doctor since I was a kid. But then somehow I was not able to get that merit marks in my 12th grade. So that time, and I belong to the international board, so we just had 5 seats. If there are 150 seats for MBBS course, so we just had 5% of it. That means 5 seats of that 150 seats. So I didn't get much of the marks in my 12th grade, and then it was like the people who belonged to a lower caste than me took those seats, and I was not able to get the admission in a government college, and then I had to go to a self-finance college. But, okay, the grades were not much that good, but it were good. So I was so disappointed by the fact that should I be staying or living or belonging to a different family from mine? So it's a huge question to ask yourself, that if would have been a daughter of a less richer man than my father, I would have been taken the admission in the medicine easily and with low fees. So that made me very sad.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that. And that's a sensitive topic. Not a lot of students from other countries around the world face the caste system when it comes to picking an education. So thank you. So our next question is going to be open to the panel to answer generally. So what are some of the obstacles faced in trying to receive a quality education for children and families in your respective countries? And any of you can take that question. Yes, I can repeat the question. So what are some of the obstacles faced in trying to receive quality education for children and families in your respective countries?
Okay, so as far as our generation is concerned, everybody is into education. But I belong to a very orthodox and a conservative family. Not everybody was educated. From the family of 23 members staying together, only 3 people did their bachelor's and were able to cope up with their lives. So it was very difficult for them to make the next generation study, that make the next generation understand the importance of education. While my grandparents were like, what is the need for studying? Because they never studied. They didn't know what is education, what is going to school and then obtaining a degree and then getting a good job and getting a good pay or so. They were like, okay, just grow up, work with your family, stay with your family, and earn your living by any means, and then that's your life is set. So it was very difficult. It is very important, and it is a big time obstacle if your parents are not educated, and then you let them understand what is the importance of education, like going out for events, like going out for conferences, like staying at school for a long time. It is very difficult for students to make parents understand who are not educated that you got to do some stuff which you can just do in the school itself, not at home. So that is a big obstacle.
To draw a comparison, for us it's not so about if you have those old differences, but for like generally speaking, everyone accepts that education is very important. But though, for example, there are differences between class differences to some extent still, though we have a very equalized system and we try to implement this in Germany, but in the end, it is really also depending still on your family background. If you have immigrants, families, and the parents that don't speak German, it is very difficult a lot of time to teach them how to improve their German, how to improve their writing skills. The same probably as well for after the fourth class, what I told you, as we have the separated school system. And so if you have parents who did an apprenticeship and they work already somewhere for 50 years or 40 years, and they don't expect their children to get an Abitur and then to study and so on. So they don't really they try to be so. For example, in the past, only about 30% went to the higher school. Nowadays, about 50 to 60% of all students go to and do an Abitur, an A-level. So it has become more popular. Everyone wants to have the chance to study, but not everybody is capable, and though not everybody is good in an environment where you study for 4, 6, 7 years, really depending also on the time.
For us, just to put it within context, 3 main things: political instability, your socioeconomic background, and your exposure and or curriculum, which is something that I'm very forward about when it comes to Nepali educational system. For me to have international schooling and having that multilingual educational system was very helpful, because we had teachers from all over the world. We had very few Nepali teachers. They had accents from all over the world, which is why you can't pinpoint what accent I have right now, because even I don't know. And they were all from all walks of life. It was beautiful little bubble that I was born into, but that was because I am grateful and I'm privileged enough to have that educational system. But right next to our big international school in the neighborhood, we used to do community service in a really small government schooling system where they didn't even have the basic amenities that we had. So just having, even if you are in a capital city, that doesn't mean that they had all the amenities that we were born into or we had that exposure to. So just having a good socioeconomic background or not having a good socioeconomic background is a barrier and is the defining theme of where you're going to go. There are very few cases of people who have better exposure, which is why I use that also as another theme as being whether it's an obstacle or not, because even if, let's say, you go to a private school, if the curriculum is not as updated and as global and universal as Dr. Scorza mentioned, then it doesn't do you enough good, because you just have one set of curriculum that the government issues depending on the political scenario, and then that becomes your status quo. And then the first thing that I mentioned was political instability. It's the most defining thing back home, because for schools like ours, there's 5 schooling system where one is governmental, the other one's international, the second one is private, semi-sector, the fourth one would be private-public, and the fifth one would be public/private hybrid system, where it all depends on what kind of political affiliation you have. And for schools like ours, which were not affiliated because they didn't join the state and the educational system, so it was independent of that, and we were completely international curriculum based. And for the remaining of them, even if there were some private schools that were not involved politically, but they had affiliation because they have that governmental connection, if there was any political event, political rally, they would have to have the schools shut. we would be having school, and we would have to go to school, but our cousins or our other friends from other school, or even our helpers' daughters and sons, they wouldn't be able to go to school because they would have to stay back home, and that would be a holiday for them, while political instability would be going around the capital as well as the country, and they would have to shut the schools because they were all affiliated politically. So just having a political stable society would be the first thing Nepal would have to reform.
Now, being that you were, if you don't mind answering, being that you were blessed with a private education and being able to study abroad, do you believe that one day you'll be willing to go back and assist the Nepali education system, or those other members of your country in advancement?
That's such a beautiful question. That would be a dream of ours, and even other Nepalis in the room can. Shishita is over here. She's at the back. She's an ISAE board over there. If you know Ruby Karki, if you know Urusha Lama, if you know Byanjana Thapa, we're from the capital, and we are all from that private schooling system. It's very easy to just say, but then at the same time, we need to have a better understanding of how the schooling system is back home, because our exposure was different and it was much more in its own bubble, because we weren't affiliated to what was going on with our own nation, because we were not as affected the way the others were. So that would be the dream, to go back home and make some reforms, but also being mindful that just because we went abroad doesn't mean we have the best ideas, because back there, people who have better ideas, who've been living under that condition, also know better. So I would say having a hybrid system of what we understand and having a hybrid system of what they understand and meeting each other halfway would be the best way to reform Nepal.
Awesome. And I would like to move on to my final question directed at the panelists before we move to open Q&A with the audience. And if you wouldn't mind answering this first, but possessing the firsthand experience that you all have in your respective countries, what steps do you think are necessary to take to improve the quality of education back at home?
Wow. I would say, coming from the giant of Africa, referred to as Nigeria, Nigerians of today are self-centered individuals. They're very selfish. It's all about me, myself, and my family. So it's like Nigerians of today are unpatriotic towards the country Nigeria. So I would say, for instance, you find professors, teachers, who studies like probably physics, and they're teaching history. So it's like they're not passionate about what they teach, but they rather choose to teach that simply because they have to fend for their family, they have to pay their bills, all those reasons. So I would say, for me, I'm glad I became patriotic enough. I'm glad I became much more passionate about Nigeria, about my fellow Nigerians, about going back home in the future and helping out. So I would say, if there are many more Nigerians just like myself who can also wake up to this great call of being patriotic enough, to actually love Nigeria and not just love themselves, I think that would be better.
Thank you, Jude. And I can sympathize with you to a degree. I have a Nigerian heritage, so I understand this issue very personally. So thank you, Jude. Vishaka?
Yes. Personally, I would love to say if we could move on to a more liberal, progressive world in Nepal, but that's not realistic enough. The main starting point for change stems from having a politically stable country. Step by step, we're getting there, but it's a small process, baby steps for now. We're still recovering from the earthquake that hit us 2 years back. It's still dampening our political and socioeconomic conditions. And the third thing I would say is curriculum, just having a much more universal global curriculum that I was exposed to, that would be very helpful, because that opens up your mind. You are taught to think and not told to do certain things by rigid standards. So that would, just having a very much comprehensive curriculum would be the best thing back home. And having said that, if we could all be much more advancing towards universality, just like Dr. Scorza mentioned in the slide, going towards a transformative educational system where it's not just you and I, but it's a public good. And if we could all be daughters and sons of the world, that would be beautiful.
Thank you. So, if I want to improve something in my country, I would say it's like a compliment on a high level, actually. So, but what I was focusing on is the differences if you want to study some specific subjects and you need to have a specific average grade for your Abitur. And as I mentioned that the Abitur or like the A-level is totally different in many, many areas, really depending on the federal state where you come from. It is really mandatory for a lot of students nowadays in Germany that we have an equalized system of a single Abitur, because then we can draw a comparison between people who come from Berlin or from Hamburg or from Munich or from another area in Germany. And so it's not fair because every university can decide which kind of average degree you need, and it is much more easy to get a 1.2, 1.0 in Hamburg instead of getting it in Bavaria, for example. So that is actually something what we would improve.
As I said, the caste system and the corruption. I'll be happy to just stop people from dividing themselves in different castes, and I might, if I get a chance, I might help the government to organize and conduct many competitive exams for the students such that they don't have to give the donations and take the admissions for their studies. Otherwise, we are fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, panelists. So the floor is now open to open Q&A from the audience. So if any of you have questions, please feel free to ask our lovely panelists. Any takers, don't be shy. They're not going to bite. You're right there. Please stand up.
One time your name and then the question.
Hi. I have a friend in Germany. She's actually studying arts there. She's informed me that even the German university, they open up for international students to provide a free education. I would like to know how that works.
First of all, yes. So what's your name at first to the audience? Okay, good. Hi, Nancy. Okay, so we have an average of international students in Germany by law that is mandatory to have for each part. So if you study political science, if you study medicine, there's in each university a percentage of international students. It's mandatory that you have it. It's a law what is run by the federal state. Also for each subject it's a bit different. It's something in between 5 and 20%. Sometimes it's even more than 25%. And yes, most of them, they can study as well for free. But some, especially if it's a private university, you have to pay the full tuition. And sometimes if you don't come from America, if you don't come from inner European states, the tuition can be very high actually. It is really depending on the university where you study. And if it's a public school, also the tuition could be higher. It is depending on the program, actually. And if you come from inner European Union, you are more selection is higher that you get. Are you in the European Union, one of the federal state, because of the Erasmus program? That's one part, and there's a pre-selection of students who come from the European Union.
I have a follow-up question. The quota system for international students, so the percentage is separate for the internationals, and then there's a separate percentage for the immigrants, or are they compiled together as one strata?
It's depending on which status have the immigrants. So, we have kind of different status for immigrants. Most of the immigrants that come to Germany, they will have a visa long stay visa probably. If it's a refugee, in average they stay 4 to 5 years, and then they can apply for citizenship, etc., etc. And it's also depending, like a lot of Syrian, they will probably stay for long term, although they don't have the refugee status to some extent, but the percentage of them that they go stay is very high, especially for young children, for young people. Because we have, actually also think about it, Germany is a very old society in comparison, and we have a very, very low birth rate. So it's only 1.3, 1.4, and it's the same problem what China is facing. And we need younger people, so we want to educate them. That is also one of the points why we want to integrate people. And if people from other countries come and they already have a good education in school, and it is good for us if they go to university in Germany.
I would like to add, if any of you guys or your friends or family is planning to study, India is open. Nobody will be denied. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, yes, please.
Germany seems to be like well ahead of the United States in areas of like green energy and sustainability and conservation and self-sufficiency. I was wondering to what extent is that a product of the educational system? Do they push that in the school systems and higher up in the universities? And also I wanted to get your comments if any of the systems that you've been in had a push, taught that kind of thing or pushed that kind of thing like with green energy and sustainability and climate.
Is the question now directly faced to me, or is it generally speaking?
First, and then if they had any other.
Okay. So what I can comment on this is, at first, we don't want to have a comparison between different nations and states. All school system has its own way of his own pace, his own historical background, and his own development. So it is not very easy to say, well, it is like this or it is like this. What we do have in Germany is a strong emphasis of general education for 13 years, especially if you have a higher education for a gymnasium. So you have in the A-level 13 different lessons. So it's the same as an undergraduate student here, actually. Like you have a very broad knowledge already, and you get specified later already in your bachelor. So, and you have subjects here as well. Like a lot of subjects, they focus on sustainability, on a lot of things. So I don't see so huge differences so far.
So I had a subject called environmental science from my 6th grade to my 12th grade, and it was compulsory. And I studied every kind of pollution. I studied all the biodegradable, non-biodegradable materials. I studied disinfection. I studied everything related to atmosphere, the climate, the earth, everything till 12th, and it was compulsory.
Just like she said, I also have, I had similar experiences like that while attending high school back in my own country. But then looking back at now, it's all dying off because we have unpatriotic professors and teachers who are just there to make a living for themselves. So they don't really enjoy what they teach. They're just there to survive, which is so sad. So, but back when I was growing up, we had professors who were so passionate about all these things, the green energies, save the planet, all of these things, but we just lost that. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question from the audience?
Nazir Rahman. So congratulations and learning a lot from the panel. My question is very one. If there is one positive experience from the American education you have along with here that you want to bring home and transfer, what would that be?
Great question.
That was a great question. For me, I am trying to see, global education as a means of helping to develop my own country, rather than being engraved into the so-called brain drain that's going on. It's so catchy. We tend to fall for these many a times. I have seen many of my fellow Nigerians who are living in the States. They're all carried away with different things, with their profession, and they have no time to go back home to help out. And even when they do, they end up going back home at a very old age. So it's like there's nothing to give. So it's like they're down already, So that's my goal. My goal is to, enjoy the global education and go back home and try to help out, rather than just get enclosed and caught up with the brain drain system.
May I have your name again, sir? Asleen. Thank you for the question. I would have to say there can be myriads of things that you take for positive advantages from any schooling system, but for me here personally, I love my professors, especially in the political science department. I feel so fortunate to have them because I've known them since freshman year and they're involved in my life, not just academically, but in terms of extracurricular, in terms of personal matters as well. Like, for example, Dr. Rafalides and Dr. Scorza and Dr. Ojo, they're very, very hands-on with their students. And we meet their families, they're involved in our social life. It's just very positive. When you meet professors as such, it's beautiful. I've had similar experiences back home, but that was only in my international school because I had that opportunity to meet. My sociology professor back home was also similar. My English professor, who made so much significance, importance in our lives back home, when my friends and other students from Ratu Bangla, my school's name is Ratu Bangla. So when we go back, after meeting your family, they go back and meet their professors because they're friends. And if everyone from back home in Nepal could have that would be such a great support system. And talking about support system here, in Nepal, there's still a stigma of mental health, and it's not as extensive in America because here we are a little more open about it as compared to back home. And to have that would be beautiful because there was a time back in high school when a lot of us, we were in the 10th grade and we were taking our PSATs, SATs, A-levels, O-levels, IGCSEs, the 10th grade and another board exam, 7-8 board exams, and we didn't have a life. And to have that kind of extra support system, not just for our school, but for the entire nation would be so helpful. So to lift off that stigma in mental health and to have much more interpersonal relationship with your professors, to have professors who actually care about your educational system and who influence and inspire you, just having that, if a lot of young little girls back home in Nepal, if they could have that, that'd be great. Thank you.
So for me, it is a bit different because I study here only for 1 year. It's a 1-year program, and I stayed 3 years back in Germany. I literally decided to go to FDU because of this intercultural affairs, and as I have international relationships as my other major, I think FDU is really about having this opportunity to meet a lot of different people from a lot of different countries. And I'm so pleased to sit here today and having this discussion as well, and also to have the opportunity as well to go into the society and to meet a lot of different students, also staff faculty members. They are not only Americans, they come from a lot of different countries. They have great experience. They bring in great ideas from different regions, and I think on this campus it is very important to look also on the details and to want to go into a chat with the people. And it is all about what you make. For me, this 1 year, it is all about what you want to make out of this year. And education on this campus is as good as you want to have it, because you can have a personal exchange with a lot of people. You have to force it. You have to deal with it.
Okay, so I would take the coolness of all the professors back home. Yeah, because we back home, they were not so lenient, so happy-going, so okay with everything. They were not. We were asked to sit straight. We couldn't turn. We couldn't talk. We were so afraid to talk to them that they would smash life out of us. It's not in a bad way, but still, we were very afraid of our professors. So I would take the coolness of the professors back home.
Okay, well, thank you. And as much as it pains me to bring this wonderful event to a close, I would like to first begin by thanking you, the lovely audience, for attending and asking the critical questions that you have. I'd also like to thank the Office of Global Learning and International Students Association for coming together to bring this wonderful event, and our keynote speaker, Dr. Scorza. Thank you, Dr. Scorza. You did an amazing job, very insightful. That's a round of applause. So please feel free to eat the rest of the food in back or take it home with you and mingle with our lovely panelists while they're still here. And thank you. Another round of applause to yourselves for coming out to this wonderful event. Thank you.
Can we have a round of applause for Press as well? He worked really hard.
Thank you.